Danielle Moretti-Langholtz is our curator of Native American art here at William & Mary, and she holds a variety of other positions, including as an instructor in the Department of Anthropology, and she focuses in on Native studies. She has had an amazing guiding hand in developing our collection of Native American art here at the Muscarelle Museum. And I think as you look around this room, it's evidence of the depth and breadth and importance of our collection of practicing, I'll call them contemporary Native American artists, and what I like to refer to as near contemporary Native American artists, some of those who have practiced in very modern times but maybe are no longer with us. And this exhibition that Danielle is going to discuss in conjunction with her talk tonight really speaks to what we have here at the Muscarelle Museum and at William & Mary. Danielle is an amazing partner at the museum. She's incredibly thoughtful about everything she does. She's a very talented researcher and partner with the Native communities both near and far. And so I want you to join me in welcoming Danielle Moretti-Langholtz for her talk tonight.
Firstly, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. It's great to see some special friends that I haven't seen in a while. It's lovely to see some of you. You know who you are. I want to start by saying this title is rather wide-ranging, and I thought about different ways of conceiving what we're going to discuss tonight. And I'd like to have it be that maybe we go on a journey and reflect on some questions together that may have no easy answers, but that's an exciting thing about the world of art. But I want to start with William & Mary's land acknowledgement, which I think is particularly important. This is November, it's Native American Heritage Month, and there's the image of the Bradford Inn. And this land acknowledgement is also in our foyer with a map that Rob Rose helped create with me that shows you where all of these groups on this list are. So we want to acknowledge Indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today: Cherenhaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawomack, Upper Mattaponi, Rappahannock tribes, and we pay our respect to their tribal members past and present. In that same vein, in the Spiegel Gallery, I have a portrait of this woman up, the late Thomasina E. Jordan, my mentor, personal mentor, Wampanoag elder. And I wanted to point out that Native American Heritage Month was signed as a legislation by George Bush I in 1990. But not much ever happened with that in the Commonwealth of Virginia until this woman said, you know, Virginia has a Native history too, and she fought to make Virginia. So we have our own legislation in Virginia. It's of 1996, establishing November, and notice the terminology, as American Indian Month. If there's time, we can talk about why, and Wednesday, preceding Thanksgiving, appreciation for American Indians in the Commonwealth of Virginia. She felt we needed to have our own law to bring this to the forefront of the population. This is before we had any federal tribes. So the federal recognition bill for Virginia Indians for 6 tribes in Virginia is named for her. So you can read more about her in the Spiegel. So I want to start today with this journey and think about new directions in Native art, question mark. When I thought about this title, New Directions, I was thinking, how can we go in a new direction without thinking about where we've been? I know he wants me to stand over there, but I like to walk around when I talk, so I'm going to do that. I was thinking about if you're in a parked car and you need to go someplace, maybe you're parallel parked, you might need to back up to get out of the spot before you go on. We're going to back up a little today in order to get where we need to go. From where have we been? And where are we going? And if you look at these two images, one, and Laura tried to teach me how to use this one here, okay, the image here from my former institution, the American Museum of Natural History, sort of the typical presentation of Native stuff. And next to it, Fritz Scholder, and we have two works by him in this gallery, not maybe what we'd all expect. So what are our expectations? Where have we been, and where are we going? And let me make a really important point right at the beginning. If we're thinking about new directions, this gallery, I appreciate what you said, David, we are surrounded by new directions in this gallery. So we just have to look around and see what some of those new directions are. But let's think about historical context for shared ideologies. I don't want to insult anybody, but looking around, you're probably close to my age, because I remember this. There's a picture of Chicago, 1968, political activism. We've come through a summer and a year of a lot of activism, and reflecting on this era, it almost looks like, hey, we need to have a conversation about what was before. So a lot of activism. Simultaneously, the #1 bestseller in 1970 was by Dee Brown, the librarian at Oklahoma State, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. I remember reading it as a brand new college student, and I thought, I didn't know anything in this book. It changed my life. If you want to say, is there a book that changed your life? This was it, and I said, I want to do anthropology. This book. And I don't think the title is an accident to what happens later in Red Power. Also, what's going on? Woodstock, Bob Dylan, a favorite of my husband. I chose this song in particular. It came out a little bit earlier, but it had an impact. It really summarized what's going on. The times they are a-changing. We can all sing it later if you want to. Have the words up. What surprised me in doing research for this and a previous project that prefigured this, I didn't know Bob Dylan was from Minneapolis. The formation of the American Indian movement was in Minneapolis, and it wasn't a coincidence. AIM, Red Power, the American Indian movement had some high visibility. And one of the most famous visible action, direct protest actions, took place at Alcatraz, the abandoned federal prison in the harbor there off San Francisco. This image, and we have a print of it in the Spiegel, You Are on Indian Land. This is by Michel Vignes, a photographer from France who did some other very, very interesting work. But this is one of the most iconic, not the only one, there are a number from this occupation. Actually not the American Indian movement, but Tribes of All Nations, which gives birth to the American Indian movement. And if you look at our beloved TV, Indians on the Wall there, which is a composite of stereotypical images on TV by Cara Romero, you will see this is on one of the TVs. But we also, in the gallery, have this amazing photograph by Art Kane. If you look this up, it says it's 1971. We can talk later why I think it is not, but that's another side topic. But this is amazing. Please take time to look at this. Not only the perspective of it, but what it portends. The composition that includes men and women, people of different ages, the expressions on their faces, and Richard Oakes, who's right in the middle. If I can figure out how to do this, here's Richard Oakes, his wife. And this is taken not long before he leaves Alcatraz, internal fighting. Shortly thereafter, he is murdered in California. It's an amazing and horrible story. He's a Mohawk Indian from upstate New York, is the one who is leading this effort at occupation of Alcatraz. And it's not just for fun. There's a real long history of why, not a long history, a long complicated story of why do they choose this spot, what precipitated it, and what they were interested in doing. This again leads to the rise of Red Power here with Dennis Banks and Russell Means. A lot of what is going on here is a very complicated story about post-World War II removal of Indians from tribal lands to urban areas such as San Francisco, Oakland, Chicago, Oklahoma City, Denver, as a way of saying, hey, get acclimated, post-World War II, you can get jobs, you can work, let's get off the reservation, everything's gonna go fine. And we have a disaffected group of Native people in these urban areas that did not adjust well, who looked back at their reservation areas and then saw, well, there was some wisdom there. We have lost our connection. Dennis Banks and Russell Means in particular focus on this treaty of 1868, Treaty of Fort Laramie. Look it up, it's online. This is a handwritten image of it. You go to the Library of Congress. It's considered one of the 100 most important documents in US history. Why this and Red Power? As Dennis Banks, Russell Means, and others said, this treaty also guarantees us the use of lands that the federal government no longer wants. They saw Alcatraz as a government abandoned property, and also said, this is perfect for Native people, no water, no electricity, and no possible way of making a living. Perfect for Indians, we want to claim it. So there was a little bit of that in the background of Alcatraz. There were other big events with Red Power, and this one particularly didn't go the way Alcatraz did, even though internally. Alcatraz galvanized a lot of the population in California and around the nation, and people in Hollywood and Los Angeles would come up and support them. Jane Fonda, record groups giving money for food. It was a kind of a positive spin on an occupation. This was different. Trail of Broken Treaties. They organized a cross-country trek to Washington, D.C., and this picture really tells a lot about how this turned out. They expected they'd meet with government officials, say, let's talk about the treaties, let's talk about what was guaranteed in the treaties, we only want the rights to the treaties. But nobody in D.C. would meet with them, and so this is what happened. And this is the kind of image that was on the nightly news. So after the positive, isn't this cool, Alcatraz, here's what happens. Natives were said, oh, they wrecked the offices, they destroyed art that was in there, they took files. Native people say, yeah, we did take some files, because they're files about us. This is a turning point with Red Power. Things are not going well. The next big thing that most of us know about is the occupation of Wounded Knee. Now, remember the book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee? No accident that AIM decides to go to that spot again that's already known in the consciousness of the American public as 71-day occupation, but based in issues of arrest and incarceration of Indians that they felt were unfair at this time. So some images about Wounded Knee. AIM logo that is still popular, and you may know. So how do we get from there to art? I think it's very much there's a path from there to art, and I want to ask you just to focus on some select outcomes of AIM, and you can read them on the screen. Importantly, the federal government decisions to say we're now going to be in the era of self-determination. So that's important. Pardon me. Indian Child Welfare Act, but importantly in 1978, American Indian Religious Freedom Act. This changes the nature of things. Say we're going to reinvigorate our ceremonies. Things that have been hidden, that have been placed in art in the past, are now going to be out and exposed, as well as pardon me, creation of the National Museum of American Indian, reversal of American Indian Language Act, NAGPRA, which I'm still working on directly for William and Mary here, and look at the last one. This is just a few. All this is federal legislation. Indian Arts and Crafts Act criminalizes non-authentic Indian art, the production and making of. Somebody says, oh, I'm actually native, and can you buy this? It's against federal law. So as I say to my students, why is there a law? They don't just have a law. That means there was an issue, and they may have to have a law to deal with it. So I want to ask you to visit this website. It's called Rising, the American Indian Movement in Third Space of Sovereignty. My students and I did this exhibition online. We thought it would be a little tight exhibition, and it went on and on. It'll probably take you an hour to go through. It has video, audio, all from the time period, and lays out in much greater depth what this is about. And we've got there's a panel up in the other gallery with something you can scan, and also it's hosted at the museum website. I would really encourage you to look at this. And I'm happy to say it was a gold medal winner in 2020 at CMYK. So where is art in all of this? One question that came up in the world, I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I want to admit that up front. And a question that we have in anthropology often, or at least have had, until the 1990s. What is Native American art? What is it? So I ask you question number one. Is this Native art? Does it consist of art? Is it an article of clothing? Is it an artifact? Is it a cultural piece? You can think about it. In 1986, there is an exhibit called The Arts of the North American Indian in Oklahoma. I was a brand new graduate student at the University of Oklahoma, and I'm very happy to say I got to see this exhibit. This might have been the third thing that changed my life in terms of professional life. First thing being bury my heart at Wounded Knee. The second one is coming up. This is number 3. A phenomenal exhibit in Oklahoma, basically raising questions. Where have we been with art? Where are we going? What do we do about Native art? What about traditional forms? Does it always have to be traditional? What about contemporary art? Is it primitive? What about change? As an anthropologist, I know there's always change. But we have put Native people in this place for them to be authentic. They can't ever change. There's no such thing. What about individuals who just say, I'm breaking with tradition, or there's some of those in this room? Maybe. I'm whatever my tribe is listed. Look at Emmy Whitehorse, Navajo. We're not expecting that. We're not expecting an image of something that is a moment after the rain in an arid area, and she's produced something that is olfactory on a painting. What about innovation? And I had a former doctoral student. I asked her to study this. She did this in the Southwest with makers of Kachina dolls. How much innovation can you do before your own community says you've gone too far? That's enough of that. We don't like that. So what's the positionality of the audience and the maker? And who is it being made for? And how do we get to these questions? And how can we answer them? Well, here's how we got to the questions from an anthropologist's view. Cabinets of curiosity. Where have Native arts been hiding? The spoils of colonialism. This, if anybody knows, Pitt Rivers at Oxford. And you know what? Go to their site, because they've got this crazy thing. You can actually, like, you're moving around and look at the different cases, and they redid this. This is crazy. They actually renovated this, and then decided they're going to leave it the same way, because it is such a perfect example of an old style of doing things that we needed this. It's wild. But very little labels, right? Here we've got one. What is this? Human form in art. Okay, oh, there's a totem pole. The last time I visited there, there were Haida people from Canada to look at the totem pole. These are very serious questions. Where has Native art been? And where it's been hidden in these areas, hidden in museum storage units. This is the number 2 thing influencing me growing up in New York, my favorite place to go. And I came to William & Mary from this institution, from the American Museum of Natural History. But do we have art there? The Hall of the Northwest Coast. It certainly has aesthetics. It certainly is important. It is amazing. It's not presented as art. It's presented as cultural form. Very few informational text. And who is the voice? Part of tonight's talk is Indigenous voices. Who's the voice? The voice of the anthropologist, not the voice of the Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian people. So I kind of think the art's hidden in plain sight. They're also redoing this, the Umiak. Haida Umiak is really great now that that hall is being redone, but still, what's the voice? And of course, where is it? With dinosaurs, rocks, and other things. And this has been critiqued heavily. Bad anthropologists hiding that stuff in with rocks and dinosaurs. And then I also think, hey, good anthropologists, because we're now at a place where we say, hey, oh, you've come back because you want to look at this, you want to see this rattle, how it was made, you want to see the notes of the last person, anthropologist, to see this ritual performed? Absolutely. Absolutely. Janist had 2 sides of this coin. This is a piece that we actually have here. And so what do we do when we say, still the question, is it art? What are the aesthetics? What's the quality of the piece? Made by whom? Everything in this room, we know the artist's name, and we have a statement by them. But is this art? It's identifiable as a Zuni, maker unknown. Well, we have this piece also, donated by Bert Myers, father of Terry Myers, Professor Terry Myers, in honor of Bert's mother. Spectacular Zuni bowl. Spectacular. We have another photo of Catalina. This is Catalina Zuni with the bowl, 1920. My husband and I went out to Zuni. I actually met with this woman's granddaughter. I showed her the picture. She said, I didn't know about this. I told her what we knew. Is this art? I also went into Santa Fe to the premier gallery, Andrea Fisher, and I said, here's a photo. And Andrea said, this is fantastic. This piece may be the best bowl of its kind I've ever seen. Is it signed? I said, no, I just have the picture of the maker. She said, too bad it's not signed. It'd be worth several $100,000, probably now only worth 20 or 30. So art, who signed it? Who made it? Can you prove it? We can prove the culture. We can define the era. So we're going backwards to this question of what is art. And I don't know if anyone recognizes this aerial photo. St. Augustine, Florida. Doesn't everybody love this here? Used to be called Fort Marion. It's gone back to the original Spanish name. It was built in the early 1600s, Castillo de San Marcos. this was the site of the federal government holding prisoners of war. 3 different times, prisoners of war were held there, but the one I want to focus on is the middle period of Fort Marion, and the dates I'm showing you here, 1875 to 78. Why? Many of us look to this period as a formative turn in our road tonight, in our journey for the beginning of Native art. That doesn't mean the artifacts weren't art, but something changes here. And here's what happens. These POWs were given paper and pencils as kind of a hallmark creation of flat 2-dimensional drawing that are biographical sketches of things that happened. Their version of a battle, their version of history. Some names of the ledger artists are known. This is written by someone else. Roman Nose, a Cheyenne chief. Some universities and the Smithsonian have a collection of these. I know Dartmouth has a fabulous collection. University of Oklahoma has a collection. I got to work with these. Zotom, very famous one. There's a drawing of something in his life. He is known. And actually, we even have a photo of him. And here he is. Creator of a number. We know the names of these prisoners of war. Not all of them, but many of them. Now look at this photo. Also in the photo is Lieutenant Richard Pratt. Pratt is the guy, the Army officer who says, you know, this is past the Civil War. We can work with these people. We can be assimilated. We can put this war behind us. This is the Plains War of captives. We can put this behind. They're trainable. He brings some of them close to us to Hampton University. Some freely come with him. He is the founder of the Carlisle Indian School, the boarding school that now is often in the news with others of being this horrible assimilationist factory. But at this point in time, Pratt is saying they can draw stuff. They sell these ledger paintings to visitors on Sunday, get the money, buy more pencil and paper. In this, I chose this photo. You see, some of the men are holding pads with paper. They buy ledger books that are used in stores, ripped out the papers, and draw pictures. Here's one that I like. I'm calling this acculturation. And there's Zotom. He says, here, our hair's cut. We go to school every day. We learn to read and write. They're recording their life as POWs, but this is my favorite. It's actually titled, if you can read it on the bottom, Indian Prisoners and the Ladies Archery Club, St. Augustine. Doesn't remind me of what I think we hear about Guantanamo, but it is funny. These guys must not be dangerous. They're working to teach women to shoot bows and arrows, and we see most of the women have not done a good job hitting the target. So there's some humor in these young men who are prisoners of war. Okay, what's this? How is it connecting to art? This is a really special photograph of the Kiowa Five standing outside their house of Professor Oscar Jacobson of the University of Oklahoma. A woman came to Professor Jacobson and said, you know, I'm Susie Peters. I know these guys. A nun told me about them. They really like drawing. You know, could you do anything with them? He says, bring them up. The professor says, they'll stay with me for 6 months. They're never going to get entry into the University of Oklahoma. It's 1928. But I'll teach them how to paint, how to mix paints, how to draw on real paper, and he does. This is some of their work. Everybody whose art is up in this room would know the Kiowa Five. This particular work, I will say, we now have. This is Stephen Mopo. It's one of the more famous of the Kiowa Five. But look at the presentation, flat presentation. These men, the Kiowa Five, are the grandsons of some of the prisoners of war in Fort Marion. You see the immediate connection with the art. It's interesting, this piece with the backs to them, to us, it's called squaw dance. I'm already thinking, oh no, that's gonna be a name people aren't gonna like, but squaw is from Wetawan squaw, which is the name of female leaders that was used around here and transferred to other female leaders and shortened to squaw. But now we hear it and we think it's pejorative. The Professor Jacobson took 30 plates to France in 1929, 30 original works of the Kiowa Five, and they were reproduced into portfolios, where you bought the portfolio and you got all 30 pieces. We here own that one original, but we own the 50th anniversary reprinting of this portfolio, which is considered so important, 1979, and we have a full copy. And a few years ago, I did an exhibit on the legacy of the Kiowa Five and contemporary art, and had all of these framed over here, so special to see them again. But this was a bourgeois technique of stencil, hand stenciled every single one of these. But the important point is this art became very popular in Europe. The Kiowa Five, very, very popular, and they came back to the United States. In researching the Kiowa exhibit, I had the privilege to take 3 undergrads with me to Oklahoma, and we are standing outside Jacobson's house. And that house is now run by the Kiowa tribe on the grounds of the University of Oklahoma as a place of art and conversation. And I want to show you the interior of Jacobson's house is an art gallery. You can buy art from any tribal members in Oklahoma. This is kind of special because you see a version of the picture I showed you, only the professor's in that picture. And on Tuesdays in Norman, Oklahoma, you can go and they make Indian tacos, and you can eat lunch there. So behind me, what's the connection? Behind me, hidden here, is Autobiography Teepee from Tom Pulaw, who's Kiowa, who's related descendants of the generation of ledger drawers. So all of a sudden we can see that line coming from the ledger art to the Kiowa Five to Tom Pulaw. He says, my autobiographical teepee, autobiography teepee, and his own personal history there. That's a direct connection to earlier forms. Ledger art is undergoing a great renaissance. This is a piece, the original also at Dartmouth, and I'm saying Dartmouth was absolutely a leader in collecting Native art. Absolutely, it still is, along with the University of Oklahoma. And I want to make that point that other institutions, I would say institutional museums, have not been in the forefront the way that university museums have been. And I think that's something important to mention. But this piece I showed students recently, and every time I look at it, I feel like I see something new, but it's a shorthand for the entire, if we've said if there's one piece that is the history of the Plains Indians, it's this piece, in 4 quadrants. On ledger paper, Dwayne Wilcox is a very, very popular contemporary artist who's Lakota Oglala. So cell number 1, all the teepees, some of them decorated. 2, up the Plains Wars, but there you see the ledger art similar to what I showed you earlier. 3, there's settler colonialism writ large. and almost American Gothic down at the bottom, the couple and the log cabin. But 4 is a puzzlement. 4 is a puzzlement. And I ask you to look at that. And it's the coming home, a funeral guard for an American Indian native soldier. And in my class, I have a student who's in, I don't know, Marine, or was a Marine, and he wrote to me, he said he was so moved by this, as well as the fact that Dwayne Wilcox absolutely correctly represented Marines that do this job. And I didn't know that. I mean, I recognize it as a funeral situation, but he said no, he is perfect. It is perfect with the badge, faces forward, everything. He was so impressed with it and sent me a link to watch how people are chosen to have this responsibility that is very difficult to even be chosen. So it's wonderful to know a piece of art can impact a student. But here it is, the history of Native people. Dolores Purdy Cochran, this is a piece that I love. It was the first place winner Santa Fe Art Market called Ghost Dance. We have a small piece by her. Why is this important? Here's a woman artist entering a contemporary place of what had been a male domain, ledger art. And there are others now, several other Native women who are doing this. So we've kind of taken a chronological journey. The ledger art, the Kiowa 5 into the 1930s, but there's somebody else I want to mention, and that's Fred Cabote, who's Hopi. Fred, also around the time of the Kiowa 5, copies some, I don't want to say copies, I may say is inspired by them. And he does very well in the Southwest. And here you see a photo of him with Eleanor Roosevelt. And I think this is 1930-something. I'm sorry, I looked at it. And he's also painting. Notice what he's painting. He's at the Grand Canyon in a visitor center. He's painting Hopi spiritual art. This is a time when Native religious practice is what? Illegal. And this is why I say the work is hidden. The new directions maybe, or we talk about decolonization, Native artists are finding ways to retain traditions hidden in plain sight. But there was something else, that Cabote's work was featured in the American Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 1932. This is a later photo of him after this, where he opens up a art training space in Arizona. The American Pavilion said, we're going to show Native art, we're going to showcase American Indian art to show how far these people have come from primitivism. It was supposed to be a positive thing. It was actually not a positive thing. European art historians came, they said, we're not really impressed with this art. It doesn't actually hold up to the standards of the Western canon. It was rejected. And Cabote was, I don't want to say humiliated, was personally, Native artists, it was a step back. So the Kiowa 5 are really popular in 1929. The American government says, hey, we got more of these guys, we're going to showcase them. And it was kind of a rejection. So the 1930s is a little bit of a pullback with the art. But when I ask the question, what is Native American art? I imagine, and I might be wrong, most people are expecting something like this. But still you see the Kiowa 5, very little depth in the background, only this art starts to have movement. Usually an animal, a hunting scene. Another very popular artist in the 30s and 40s is Woody Crumbo. Woody goes into the direction of, you know what, there's spiritual aspects to animals and life and our perspective and our cosmology. He starts to paint that. Today, some contemporary Native American artists are really kind of like Woody. nah, don't like this work anymore. This is what is called the Bambi School of Art, and we don't like it. We are not doing that. Because that's what everybody who's non-Indian wants us to do, and we want to reject that. But I want to show you this. This is 1946 at its Woody Crumbo. And I don't think this is the Bambi School of Art. This is the land of enchantment. And notice what he shows. Native perspective on what it's like to live at the Four Corners, and tourists come and look at you, and maybe they want to buy something. That's the land of enchantment for Native people. Switching the frame, switching the story, saying, hey, this is our perspective on this, and it's not yours. It's not so comfortable. Here's Dwayne Wilcox. Now, a lot of people see Dwayne Wilcox, and they think, hey, this is really funny. But this is an homage to Woody Crumbo. And if you don't know about Woody Crumbo, I mean, this is still funny. But again, reversing perspectives in 2008. Also, I think in the collection at Dartmouth. I mean, I really love this piece. But again, ledger style, right? It's way back to ledger style. In the 1950s, I'm still thinking of moving forward. This is Oscar Howe. And here's a statement by him. He submitted some work to be displayed at the Philbrook Museum in Oklahoma, and they said, sorry, we're going to reject this. This is not Indian painting. So it's the late 50s, folks, where now Native people are starting to say, I'm tired of painting the same old thing. I'm actually a trained artist. I am interested in modernism, and I'm interested in making a new statement. But this work is being rejected. And it's noticed by many artists. I just wanted to say we're not yet at red power, but things are starting to move in that direction. And one thing that happens is very important that I talk about in this exhibit. Two streams that I'm talking about here, red power movement, but the founding of the Institute of American Indian Art in Santa Fe, IAIA. And this is the museum. This is actually not the campus. This starts to change the dynamic because Native people are going to be in control of the teaching. And there's going to be a different conversation about what is acceptable. So it's no accident that when you come into this exhibit, the first two pieces that you see, recent donations to us that we're thrilled to have, are by Fritz Scholder. And they're a little shocking if you're not prepared. The Screaming Indian. Fritz Scholder taught at IAIA for 2 years and then left and went to Egypt and toured in different places, but basically he said, I'm not going to paint the Indian, and with that he meant not painting the Indian that you expect to have. I'm with Oscar Howe on this, not going to do it. He is the teacher of T.C. Cannon, who died young, and Fritz Scholder said, everything I learned from T.C. Cannon. I think that's very generous, but T.C. Cannon may be my favorite in this room for many reasons. But the two of them had an exhibit in 1972 in Washington, D.C., and that starts as well to change things. And when you look at T.C. Cannon's work, it's serious. This guy's been to Vietnam. I have a piece of his poetry up. He's thinking about treaties. He's thinking about that X means that's his signature on a treaty. You made your mark. He also does his homework. These guys do their homework. They're not just like, I think I'll paint something today. They're thinking about history and memory. And look at this photo that I found that it's really reminded me of the image that T.C. Cannon has painted with the armbands and the one feather. He knew, and you get into the work of T.C. Cannon and you see He knows his history, and he's putting it out there and really trying to think about what does it mean to be a Native person in the 1970s. He's really a big fan of Bob Dylan as well. His influence absolutely remains strong. And right before the pandemic, there was a major exhibit in New York of T.C. Cannon. I went up to see it. New York Times said it was of the 10 most important exhibits in the entire year, any place that T.C. Cannon was one. So red power and issues pertaining to land are at the foundation of what happens to art and messages in art. And here we have Kay walking sticks. And we could say, well, that's really nice. I love the Grand Canyon. It's hard to get something really looks exactly like the Grand Canyon. And she's got some native things at the bottom. But she's also talking about the deep past. Many of the groups that live in the region of the Grand Canyon have stories of emergence, of coming up from the ground, that they lived there always. She is capturing some of that. She allows us to think about it. Jean Quick to C. Smith next to her here. I call these three women the rock stars of contemporary Native art, and I mean it. We don't have this piece, but just a year ago, National Gallery, first artist, Native artist ever in the National Gallery collection is Jean Quick to C. Smith, and it's this piece, I See Red Target on Mascots. We have Bunky, freshman 15, a live paint here. A lot of contemporary art is about satire and political commentary, but as well, New Directions really speak to issues that are pan-Indian, across the Indian experience, and into our own world as non-Native people. They deal with notions of this term that maybe you have heard of decolonization, environmental activism. But I think in some ways, as I reflected in creating this presentation for this evening, the decolonization of museums and Native art has already been underway for a while, and Native people have been at the forefront. I think it's a mistake if we think we're going to do that work. They've been doing that work. They are doing the work, and the work is on the walls, and it's quite amazing. We see Oil Boom, Petrichor 2, and the new piece that Native Studies, through money from an endowment that I've purchased, that will be here and is here, and come back and see it. It's being framed. Notice the title of the last one. That's Diego Romero's Girl in the Anthropocene. Is it Native art? That's my question. So I want to thank you. I'm going to end here. I got the signal from my friends that says, cut your time. I want to thank you for being on the journey with me and for coming to see this amazing work. The majority of it is now owned by the university. So thank you so much.